Kyoruka looked like your everyday college kid, so being pulled into a magical world alongside a handful of strangers came as a complete shock. To make things stranger, every one of them was given a magical ability, but Yuma was convinced he'd ended up with the worst one of all, immortality. That single blessing would drag him through some truly inhumane treatment. Everything began to change, though, on the day he crossed paths with a mysterious girl named Eva. It all started on a day like any other. Yuma had finally made it to college, living quietly and taking life one easy day at a time. Just like the main character of any comic you've ever read, he had just said goodbye to a friend and was heading toward the bookstore when a single white feather drifted down and settled on his head. Without warning, the ground opened up and swallowed him whole, and down he went, yelping like a cartoon character in free fall. When he came to, a faint voice was calling out to save him, only for it to be drowned out by a much louder one ordering everyone to rise and calling them the chosen ones. As it turned out, Yuma wasn't the only one who'd been yanked into this place, since several others were waking up around him too. The booming voice belonged to Burke Van Gigal, king of the Gigal Empire, and the older man quieted the room before announcing that they were meant to become chosen heroes. And as if that wasn't already textbook Isekai, the king asked them to help defeat the demon lord and his army. Yuma could only frown, since all he really wanted was to go home. Before the king could go any further, one of the other boys, who looked an awful lot like a certain orange-haired volleyball player, casually asked what he'd get in return for helping. Yuma couldn't believe the nerve of this guy, talking so freely to the ruler of the entire land. That's when someone else stepped in, promising that the chosen ones would be treated properly and rewarded for their efforts, and even adding that they'd be taught the lost arts once used by the heroes of old. The lookalike scoffed, saying he'd just go home if these blessings turned out to be a letdown, while the other person started leading him off somewhere else. Yuma knew letting that guy make decisions on his own wasn't the smartest move, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything, scaredy cat that he was. In the end, it came down to either following along or being left alone with the intimidating king and his guards, so he tagged along. Before long, the group was led into a room dominated by a giant stone figure, its hands clasped together in prayer, with a large sword planted right in front of it. The lady from earlier explained that this was where they held their rituals. Yuma's nerves were starting to get the better of him, but he calmed down once the Grand Priestess, Eda Han, began to speak. She told them to step up to the podium so they could receive God's blessings. And of course, the orange-haired lookalike volunteered first. The moment he did, Edna told him he'd been granted the flames of hell from the god of flames. The next boy received the power of ice, while Yuma could only hope for something that might keep him safe. He was so nervous when his name was called that his arms and legs started moving in sync as he walked, which made the lone girl in the group giggle. She also noticed that the feather stuck to Yuma had fallen off, leaving her to wonder if it meant something. Once he stepped onto the magic circle, the high priestess quietly told him he'd been given the ability to revive, granted by the god of healing. To Yuma, that felt like a bit of a downer, since it basically meant he'd still get hurt. What he didn't catch was that a few of the others in the room had started whispering among themselves. A dark-haired man in a white uniform walked over to congratulate the other three chosen ones on their blessings. Now that everything was settled, he encouraged them to go grab something to eat. Yuma, meanwhile, was still worried about his own gift and what he'd do if he ever had to fight. But there was no sense stressing over something that hadn't happened yet, especially with a lavish feast laid out right in front of him, courtesy of a man in glasses who practically screamed bad news. The guy honestly looked like a certain creepy alchemist, which only made the bad feeling stronger, but Yuma was too focused on food to dwell on it, and that alone was enough to lift his spirits. While they were eating, the orange-haired lookalike, whose name turned out to be Kakanishi, was rude enough to say that Yuma's skill wasn't worth much, but the boy who'd received the power of ice, Taka Araki, jumped in to point out that Yuma's ability balanced out everyone else's. Taka's sister, Kotomi, agreed, adding that at least Yuma would be there to heal them if they ever needed it. As reassuring as the siblings' words were, Yuma couldn't help feeling a little annoyed, since they were already treating him like he wasn't a real fighter. He pushed the thought aside and decided he'd simply focus on doing his part, planning to start practicing the very next day. Somewhere else in the building, a man reported to the head priestess that all of her preparations were complete. She reminded him to be careful with him, since he was someone precious. The nasty grin creeping out of the shadows told us everything we needed to know about this guy. When morning came, The dark-haired man with glasses knocked on Yuma's door to wake him. He explained that they were in desperate need of medical supplies and wanted Yuma's help, since his power could revive and heal injured people. Yuma agreed right away, feeling a little proud to be the first one called on. The strange part was that he was handed hospital clothes instead of armor. Once he changed and stepped into the room, something immediately felt off. Trying to shake the feeling, he asked where the people he was supposed to help were, but the suspicious man from before gripped his shoulder firmly and told him, plainly, that they were going to be using his flesh and blood. Before the words could even sink in, Yuma was strapped down to a medical chair while the rest of the crew laid out a set of horrifying instruments, leaving him shaking. He started pleading with them, suggesting they begin with something small, like just taking his blood. He never got to finish the sentence, because they tore his arm clean off. Yuma screamed in pain. The nasty man wondered aloud whether he was screaming because it actually hurt, or because he was simply in shock. But Yuma kept shrieking until a smack to the face finally shut him up. Narrowing his eyes, the man told him he wouldn't die. Sure enough, Yuma's arm grew back in a matter of moments, just like a certain regenerating superhero. It was only his second day in this strange world, so the kid deserved a break. But the creepy alchemist look-alike was far too fascinated to care. Right there, he told the crew to start using drugs on Yuma next. And to Yuma's horror, the entire room buzzed with excitement, amazed at what his body could do. Meanwhile, in another part of the building, the feather that had fallen off Yuma drifted into a certain lady's room. Surprised to find that the child was still alive, she cradled the feather in her hand, staring at it and wondering what was happening out there, while Yuma kept enduring brutal torture for the sake of humanity. He even reached a point where he started thinking about his future, telling himself he'd be fine with whatever came his way, all while horrible things were being done to his body. By now, he was a bloody mess, yet the man from before assured him that it was an honor to serve people this way. Yuma woke with a jolt, coughing hard and clutching at his neck. Had it all been a dream? No, he remembered passing out halfway through the experiments, and he knew with sinking certainty that they would start right back up the moment he came to. Just the thought of it left him trembling. He completely lost track of how many days had gone by when footsteps suddenly sounded outside his door. Seeing that it was only a guard on patrol, he let out a sigh of relief before quietly breaking down into sobs. As he wept, he begged with everything he had for someone to come save him, and out of nowhere, a giant magic circle bloomed above him. The small sounds he'd made caught the attention of the guards, but by the time they checked his room, Yuma was already gone, reappearing somewhere else entirely, beneath a giant magical tree. Back with the others, Kakanishi and Takuya were busy playing chess, completely unaware of what Yuma was going through, until Kotomi asked if they wanted to head to the cafeteria for dinner. Her older brother agreed, so she was the first one out the door, which is exactly how she happened to spot the creepy glasses guy talking in low voices with the others. She walked over and asked if something was wrong, but he quickly assured her that everything was perfectly fine. Seeing how hard they were working, Kotomi excused herself and cheered them on. The second she was gone, the glasses guy turned to his man and made it clear that she and the rest of the chosen ones should never find out what was really going on. The only place they hadn't searched yet was the labyrinth, so he ordered the rest of the crew to look for Yuma on its lower level while he went to ask the priests for help. Back with Yuma, he was lying under the tree with his mind completely blank when footsteps started approaching his spot again. 3 of the men from before were walking his way, talking about how the place was off limits to anyone below the rank of priest, which is why so few people were ever allowed inside. The labyrinth was also packed with traps, but as long as someone carried an artifact, the traps wouldn't go off. Anyone unlucky enough to wander in without one was as good as dead, which is exactly what had happened to Yuma. Lucky for him, his immortality stitched him right back together, though he couldn't help feeling more like a monster than a human, with how easily he kept regenerating after something like that. Still, he pressed on, wondering why all of this was happening to him. But before he could fully sink into self-pity, he wiped his tears and promised himself he'd find a way out. Right at that moment, the 3 men finally spotted him, and one of them rushed forward, which turned out to be a huge mistake. The instant he ran out, a giant hand descended from above and crushed him, leaving the other 2 frozen in shock. One of the guys stumbled back in horror, demanding to know what that thing was, and the older one explained that it was an instant death trap set by a mage to deal with monsters. Knowing there was nothing they could do, he suggested they retreat for now and wait for the priests. The strange part, though, was how Yuma hadn't been flattened by that same instant death trap. As for Yuma, he'd managed to run ahead, and once he saw that no one was chasing him anymore, he slumped to the floor, gasping for breath. He was thinking about how strange the labyrinth was when a voice suddenly asked what he was doing. Startled, he looked around for the source until the voice told him to look down, into a hole. Peering over the edge, Yuma spotted a pretty girl gazing up at him with twinkling eyes, who introduced herself as Eva, a girl of all things. Yuma was a little baffled, but he introduced himself anyway. More importantly, this Eva girl had some odd-looking tubes attached to her body, and that's when it hit him. Maybe she was being put through horrible experiments too, so he asked if that was the case. Eva answered casually that it was something like that, but she quickly picked up on the fact that Yuma was hinting he'd been forced through plenty of cruel tests himself. In a quiet voice, he admitted that he had. Eva was almost unnervingly relaxed about the whole thing, suggesting that he rest up and take it easy for a bit, since he'd already made it this far, and not many people ever did. That train of thought led her to notice that Yuma was completely alone, which made her curious how he'd even managed to get down here. Remembering how he died and come back to life along the way, Yuma could only mutter that he'd pushed through by sheer force, which left Eva even more puzzled. Before she could ask, he explained that he'd been blessed with immortality, and that without it, he'd have been long gone by now. Eva was surprised to learn he was immortal, since he looked like a completely ordinary human, but it also helped her understand why he was being experimented on in the first place. Compared to him, she seemed to be in much better shape. Still, if she was stuck in the same situation as him, then the obvious move was for them to run away together. Without a second thought, Yuma asked if she wanted to escape with him, though he was quick to admit that he was about as useful as a paperclip, with no combat skills to speak of. Even so, he figured he could maybe do something with his immortality. He just couldn't bring himself to leave her there, so he urged her to come see the world outside, breathe some fresh air, and eat all kinds of delicious food. An awkward silence filled the hall, quiet enough that you could practically see a tumbleweed roll by if you squinted hard enough, and he started to feel a little unsure about what to do next. When Eva finally spoke, she asked whether he planned to do something about the traps out there. He said that he would, but before he could launch into a full explanation, she cut him off and told him that he didn't need to grow used to pain and fear, not if he wanted to stay human. That left him completely speechless. Changing the subject, she asked if he noticed the pipes connected to her body. She explained that they were draining her blood around the clock, which was why she felt so anemic and powerless. With that, she asked if he could share a bit of his blood with her, and in return, she'd help him escape, promising that she was far stronger than she looked. That just confirmed his suspicions, that Eva was being held here against her will and experimented on, exactly like him. Without hesitating, he held out his hand and offered his blood, telling her to take as much as she wanted, since he'd never die anyway. Eva reached toward him, her eyes gleaming, and said it was a promise. Suddenly, a black blur shot out of her hand and flew straight at Yuma. It was a bat, and she told him it was simply a part of her. The bat pricked Yuma's arm before flying back and merging with her. Lowering her gaze, she revealed the back of her neck where the pipes had been connected, and the engraving there slowly began to disappear. She'd finally ditched the pipe, and just as she'd promised, she flew straight to Yuma, leaning over him on all fours. She swore on her name, Eva Scarlet, pure blood and the true ancestor of Red, that she would set him free. Leaning into his neck, she began to drink his blood, and that's the moment it finally dawned on Yuma that she was a vampire. Honestly, the bats and the blood probably should have given it away. Eva didn't drain him dry, taking only enough to leave herself refreshed and full of energy, since it had been ages since she'd last fed directly. She even added a little kiss as a thank you. With that done, she scooped him up under her arm, pleased to have picked up something so interesting, spread her wings, and zoomed out of there. Now that they were out, Eva was already running the numbers, figuring their first hurdle would be the trap magic from above. But to her surprise, it didn't react to them at all when she flew past it. She could only chalk it up to one thing: Yuma, who looked about ready to lose his lunch. Before she could say anything, the men from before finally caught up to them and fired the first shot. Eva didn't even lift a finger, since their attacks never reached the two of them. From there, she went on the offensive, raising her arm high as a giant magic circle appeared overhead, followed by a massive explosion. Eva blew a hole clean through the castle walls and soared high with Yuma in tow, getting a little too excited and eager to set the whole area ablaze. That's the exact moment the three other chosen ones saw her flying out with Yuma. Kakanishi reacted fast, grabbing a spear and leaping up to force Eva to release him, but the pure blood was simply too quick. She was about to unleash a fiery attack when Yuma told her to stop at the very last second. She couldn't fully hold it back, but she did manage to fire it away from Kakanishi's face and shove him aside, sending him crashing into a nearby building from the sheer force. Eva called Yuma out for stopping her at the last moment and asked if he knew that kid, and Yuma explained that he was one of the others summoned to this world. The pure blood wasn't too bothered, as she surveyed the chaos she'd caused. Her eyes swept across the entire castle, and she figured this should be enough to hold them back for a while. Now that they were free, she asked Yuma what he wanted to do next, and he told her he wanted to find a way back to his own world. Hearing that, Eva decided to become his bodyguard, since she'd vowed to set him free, and vampires take their promises very seriously. Carrying him princess style, her eyes gleamed as she told him he'd have to keep her entertained, and off she flew into the night sky. Far below them, the high priestess watched in silence as a hooded figure, the nasty man from before, knelt in front of her. Without even glancing at him, Edna told him that she had a mission for him, to recapture Yuma from the vampire, and that he was free to use that tool. Some time later, Yuma woke up disoriented, wondering where he was, when he heard Eva asking if he wanted to take a bath, standing there in nothing but her birthday suit. A flustered MC whipped his head the other way so fast, his cheeks burning bright red after catching a glimpse of the pure blood. And weren't vampires supposed to be weak against sunlight? He hadn't even recovered from what he'd just seen when an unknown man popped up right in front of him, offering a fresh set of clothes. Yuma could only crawl backward as Eva explained that this was just some random salesman she'd hypnotized along the way to serve as her slave, since mind control was a pretty common skill among vampires. She assured him, though, that she'd never use it on him because she'd promised to be his bodyguard. With a fresh set of clothes on, Eva suggested they head to the big town nearby, where Yuma finally got to eat his fill. While he was wolfing down his food, he was about to ask her about something when she casually mentioned that she'd already had her fill, and even added that Yuma now had an iron deficiency. Moving on to more important matters, the two of them turned to the question of money. Seeing how freely Eva used her mind control, Yuma told her he didn't really want to earn money that way. But luckily, the vampire had a few ideas of her own. As they walked along the forest path, Eva explained that they could quickly earn coins from the guild by hunting monsters, but first he'd need to register as an adventurer, reminding him that he was living in an isekai now. It was a little funny, though, since there didn't seem to be any monsters around, a point Eva agreed with before suddenly dashing deeper into the forest. A moment later, a whole horde of monsters came charging toward Yuma, who sat frozen in fear. Just as he was about to get swept up in the stampede, a quick flash of movement sent the monsters' heads rolling, all thanks to Eva's lightning-fast attacks. That's when he understood why it had been so quiet. The creatures had all been trying to run away from her. Not that it mattered anymore, since they were all dead. So Yuma's new concern became how to haul all this monster meat back to the guild. Eva suggested he store it in his item box, but it was the first time Yuma had even heard of such a thing. Apparently, all the chosen ones could use it. She also figured he had an appraisal skill that could help them classify the monsters, and sure enough, it worked. Yuma was stunned to find that he really did have an item box and could appraise all sorts of things. But what shocked him even more was discovering that he could control various things as well. While Eva ran off to the other end, sensing something out there, Yuma noticed that one of the monsters was still alive. As a final dying attempt to attack, it spat a stream of black liquid from its mouth, but it never reached him because a magic circle sprang up to shield him from it. Seeing that left Yuma wondering if he just used magic. It was strange, since he hadn't done anything on purpose, and yet it reminded him of that other time back at the church. Eva noticed it was getting late and suggested they spend the night at her friend's place nearby, which Yuma didn't mind at all until he laid eyes on the place, a haunted house. Of course, he was reduced to a nervous wreck all over again, but Eva seemed pleased, even remarking that it looked more popular than ever. They were greeted at the door by an old man in a suit who welcomed them with a bow and was more than happy to show them to their room. Walking through the haunted hallways, Yuma kept his eyes locked on the floor, overwhelmed by the insane number of monsters filling the place. Thankfully, he didn't have to endure it for long, since they reached their room soon enough, and it turned out to look as plush as any fancy hotel suite. What Yuma had no idea about was the keen pair of eyes that had been watching him from the darkness ever since he'd stepped into the room. For now, though, his main concern was the fact that there was only one bed. Eva mentioned that she had her own casket, but was willing to share it with him if he wanted, an offer Yuma quickly turned down.
This nigga is trash.
After all that fuss, he settled onto the bed, only to feel something strange under the covers. When he pulled them back to check, he found a pair of glowing eyes and the faint hint of a smile, which had him screaming for his life. By the next morning, the creature revealed itself to be a fluffy little ghost that had taken a liking to Yuma, who hadn't slept a wink all night. According to him, this ghostly thing had been following him around all morning, and from the looks of it, it would probably follow him outside too. So did this spell the end of his adventuring dreams? Not quite, because the butler from before crept up from behind and suggested he use a spirit stone, which is normally used to house spirits. In theory, it should work just fine for ghosts too, so it would be like having the little guy tag along as a guardian spirit. Yuma wasn't exactly thrilled by the idea, but it was his only real option. So what else could he do? With his friendly ghost finally settled in, Yuma headed straight to the guild to register as an adventurer. All eyes were on the two of them thanks to Eva, but thankfully, he was able to register without any trouble. The receptionist told him to bring his adventurer card whenever he sold or bought monster parts, though all Yuma could think about was finally being able to earn some good money. Right around then, two men from a different party walked up to Eva, telling her to ditch Yuma and join them instead. But the pure blood flat out refused, calling herself the devoted type as she strolled back over to Yuma's side.
Tell them to bring me my money.
Not that it mattered, since the two of them were already off to the dungeons. Eva and Yuma headed straight for the nearest dungeon, and it didn't take long before monsters swarmed them on the spot. Unfortunately for the monsters, Eva, being something of a beast herself, wiped them all out in a single go, and she was even happy that they'd come and attacked her first. While she celebrated her win, Yuma busied himself appraising her skills and adjusting a few things. Before she went off to scout the area, Yuma said he'd stay behind to collect the drops, but made sure to remind her not to use her wings. As he turned to look over their loot, he was surprised to find that the friendly ghost was already out and about. But it was all harmless enough, since the little guy just wanted to help. They sorted everything out quickly, and Yuma was pleased to realize they'd be set for a while once they sold their haul. He still couldn't quite believe everything that had happened, but at least he wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly, ropes wrapped around Yuma out of nowhere, a blatant kidnapping in broad daylight. Moments later, Eva walked back with a few monsters in tow when she sensed another presence and narrowly dodged an attack from behind. As she landed, she demanded to know where Yuma was, but instead of an answer, she got a laugh from the hooded figure from before. This creep had expected as much from a pure-blood vampire, so now he pulled out a new weapon in the form of a small child. In a flash, the kid was all over her with blindingly fast attacks, and from his size, Eva first assumed he was just a normal child, until she spotted the markings on his arm right as he drove a blow into her stomach. This kid was an undead who wielded holy magic. Her troubles didn't stop there, because high-level restraints quickly sealed her movements. What she didn't realize was that Yuma was actually strapped to a nearby tree, watching the whole thing unfold, while the old creep gleefully enjoyed her struggle. Sensing that something was seriously wrong with Eva, Yuma grew restless and started wondering if he could free himself from his binds. The next thing he knew, he tumbled to the ground with a thud, but he scrambled back up and reached for the magical powers he'd only just discovered. The instant he wielded, Eva's restraints were dispelled, and he leapt in to shield her from the incoming attack. Once they were out of harm's way, Yuma checked to make sure she was all right, and since his magic was still unstable, he pitched an idea to her. Rather than being amazed at the idea itself, Eva was more surprised that it had been Yuma's magic that saved her earlier. So far, the only magic he believed he could pull off was teleportation inside a barrier, while the creep from before was left scratching his head over how Yuma had teleported himself right next to Eva. None of that mattered to him, though, since he simply ordered the kid and the ghoul to attack the two of them again. Eva quickly grabbed Yuma and leapt down out of the way, and was about to put more distance between them when the creep activated a magic barrier that could withstand physical attacks. From the looks of it, their enemies had come thoroughly prepared to keep them trapped. The old creep then tossed a small vial at the ghoul kid, who bit into it, and his attacks grew even stronger as his holy magic surged to a higher level. Even so, it wasn't enough to hurt them, because Yuma blocked it with his own magic. He was getting there, but he still hadn't fully gotten the hang of his teleportation, and needed a bit more concentration, which is basically a luxury in the middle of a fight. Eva wasn't too worried about it, though, and if anything, she found him even more interesting. From what she could see, Yuma was using ancient magic, the kind that relies purely on intuition, unlike the modern magic that has to be studied to use. It was pretty obvious, since his magic circle didn't have any seals or symbols on it at all. With that, she encouraged him to simply picture what he wanted to happen, and let his will do the rest. Meanwhile, the bigger ghoul launched the kid straight at Yuma, and with his enemy bearing down on him, all Yuma could think was that he didn't want to get hurt. Right before the kid could reach him, Yuma teleported him away and zapped himself in from above. The kid dropped to his knees but didn't collapse. And that's when Eva realized the old creep had committed the ultimate taboo by making the poor kid not only an undead who uses holy magic, but one resistant to it as well. As if to confirm her guess, the old creep was actually pleased with her deductions and admitted he'd been surprised himself when the church handed the kid over to him. Seeing that Yuma had no clue how magic worked in their world, the old creep took it upon himself to explain. Originally, magic could only be performed by magical beings, and the power humans use is merely borrowed from spirits and divine beings, which makes human magic nothing compared to the real thing. Because of that inferiority, the church created the kid, a monster loyal to humans, basically a living weapon that could use magic against its fellow monsters. There was just one question left. How was the church able to create such a powerful ghoul? The chilling answer was that they turned them into ghouls while they were still children. Hearing that sent a shiver down Yuma's spine, and it made him even angrier that the old creep sounded so proud about it. How could anyone sound so pleased about sacrificing children like that? The old creep corrected him, saying they weren't sacrifices at all, since they were just orphans who'd been thrown away, and the church had simply decided to take advantage of that. To Yuma, the man in front of him might wear a human face, but deep down he was truly a monster. Even Eva looked down on the old creep, declaring that alchemy which distorts reason is taboo. She was already aware that the church creates chimeras by stealing magic, but this one had clearly gone too far. The old creep just scoffed at her views, calling them archaic. Yuma pulled her aside to talk, but they only got a few moments before the old creep ordered the kid to attack once more. The kid started charging up a beam in his hand and fired it at Yuma and Eva, who teleported right on top of him. Eva hit him with her mind control, while Yuma unleashed his force block skill, knocking the kid out cold in an instant. Now it was the old creep's turn to panic, demanding to know what they'd just done. But Yuma simply told him that they were taking the kid with them. Right before they left, Yuma turned the kid's own attack loose beneath the old creep and the rest of the ghouls, knocking them all out cold. Now that they were finally out of harm's way, Eva remarked that their first day at the dungeon had been a bit of a bummer, but at least they'd come away with some unexpected loot. At first, she'd been surprised that Yuma wanted to bring the kid along, but she found the whole thing interesting enough to go along with it. So what came next? Rather than giving her an answer, Yuma simply collapsed to the ground without a word. And that's where we'll wrap up for today. If you're enjoying the series and want part 2, go ahead and like, subscribe, and comment part 2 down below. The more support I see, the more motivated I am to keep this going. So every single one genuinely pushes me to make the next part. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.